Hey there, so thanks for joining me on a wet, kind of soggy day. I still wanted to film out here because when we're talking camp and outdoors knives, it just feels right, even when it's unideal weather. So on this channel before, I haven't done a whole lot of follow-up content. Usually when I talk about a product or a tool, I kind of move on. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to recover, sort of do an extended part 2 of my opinion of two knives that I talked about recently, and I'll put a link in the description to the previous video if you want to get caught up. But namely, the Eafengrow 143 and the Flissa 9-inch fixed blade knives. So it's been about 2 weeks since I put up the last video that was my formal review of both of these, and part of the reason I wanted to make a part 2 is while in preparation for my original video, I, especially on this one, put it through a lot of really hard beaten on sticks just to see how much abuse it could take, and was really impressed by that. You could say that the 2 weeks after that is where I fell more into my, okay, this is how I'm gonna just regularly use my knives in normal, you know, day-to-day function, rotating them. And as I kind of asked myself, okay, with these two knives and their capabilities, how do I see them fitting into my knife collection or anybody else's knife collection? I had assumed at the time that I was going to be using the Flissa 9-inch a lot more regularly, partially due to just its smaller size and more comfortable belt carry. And I've actually been pretty surprised in the couple weeks since last talking about these that it's been the opposite. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is this knife is just so capable. Not only did it totally stand up to the hardest abuse tasks that I could do without being ridiculous with this knife, but I find the weight to it really helpful for different types of tasks. I've taken like limbs and just knocked little branches off of them to get them ready for fires. I've shaved sticks with it. I've done food prep with this, and it's actually kind of similar in weight and feel to a chef knife. It's just really good for a lot of things. And to its credit, and like I said in the last video, this is my first experience with AUS 10 steel, and if this is representative of, you know, what you can probably get with that steel, I'm impressed. It seems to me that it has a really nice balance of being corrosion resistant. It can take a lot of hard use without rolling or chipping. This hasn't chipped at all in any of the tasks that I've put it through, and it takes an edge again pretty well. And I don't think that it dulls out a whole lot, because I've done a whole lot of batoning and hard stuff, and then I moved to food prep after washing it right after that, and it was still sharp enough to do a lot of that stuff, and I would have expected to maybe have to strop it up. So I was impressed with that. And on the other hand, the Flissa 9 has chipped. And that's kind of why I wanted to update you guys as well, because in my last review video I had commented that I was impressed that this could withstand batoning and stuff and didn't chip. But ironically, while it does seem to be able to withstand that kind of hard use, when I was doing just stick shaving for walking sticks for the family and stuff, after doing that I noticed a few nicks down the blade. Now they weren't difficult to kind of sharpen out and reduce, but it definitely highlights for me the recommendation to put a secondary bevel on a Scandi grind knife like this. I know Scandi grinds are known for being extremely slicey for certain tasks, but also obviously the thinner profile isn't as strong. And on the Condor bush lure that I have had for quite a while, also a Scandi grind, this was my first Scandi grind knife, I didn't have as many issues with chipping as easily. It did chip with some of the stuff I got carried away over the years a couple times, mostly my bad. But the softness of 1075 carbon steel, I think, makes it a little more forgiving of hard tasks. From what I understand of D2, it's a somewhat hard tool steel, and I think for bushcrafting, part of the disadvantage of that is that it is more maybe prone to chipping on hard type of use. And while it's held up a little better since I've put a secondary bevel on it, it does impress upon me that, you know, you watch all these bushcrafting videos and everybody's always talking Scandi grinds like that's just, you gotta have it. It's the 101 of bushcraft stuff. And part of what this Eafengrow 143 has taught me is not necessarily, because this has what I believe is a high saber grind type of style and then a nice edge there. I realize we're talking about fairly different knives, both in terms of knife steel and size, and blade shape. So it's not apples to apples. But I feel like even despite the extra weight of this, part of why it's held up better is the blade grind. And I feel like for things like stick shaving and stuff, this is not really worse in any noticeable way than the Scandi grind knives that I have anyway. Admittedly, that could be down to the way I sharpen them, I don't know. But my experience has been this still does a really good job, and it's just such a more durable knife that when I'm thinking, now, you know, I'm sitting on an acre of property, I do stuff outdoors here a lot. Obviously, being at home, it's easy to go in and grab another knife and switch up. But I also am always thinking in terms of if we went camping or if I were in a survival scenario where I'm using what I've got in my pack here, is whatever knife that you happened to bring something that you could trust your life to or really depend on? And not to entirely knock this knife, because I think for $25 it's still a great value, but to me it really taught me, be aware of the knife steel and the blade type's limitations, particularly if you did not bring a good way to sharpen, and D2 is harder to sharpen obviously than AUS 10. And so it's really made me reconsider this, that I'm like, even though it's a big knife, I've reconfigured the sheath for scout carry, and yeah, this is still a kind of a big knife for scout carry, but it does carry better, in my opinion, still that way than, like I had said in the other video, upright, because it just comes up too far up the body and kind of whacks you in the belly as you walk around. And so to me, scout carry makes this potentially viable other than just being a backpack knife. And because my experience so far in about a month of using it has been that this will put up with anything you pretty much would put a knife through, even in some cases taking the place of a hatchet for lighter duty chopping and batoning. I just feel like if I had to pick a knife in my collection that I knew if I threw it in a bag while being big, when the chips are down and I got to do serious work, I know that it could take it. This has won a lot of points for me in that regard, whereas this is not a very good food prep knife when I've done stuff with it. And since it did get a couple nicks in the blade just from shaving sticks and stuff, that makes me a little more mixed on how much I would want to trust it for an outdoors scenario where it was my only knife and I really needed to process wood and do some other stuff. Not saying it can't do that stuff, it just, for the same reason I've said before that I'm sometimes reluctant to bring the Condor Bushlore out with me just because as a high carbon steel, I know out there all the high carbon steel fans watching this are going to say, you know, if you put a patina on it and you keep it clean and well oiled, it's not that hard to take care of carbon steel. But as an interesting example, in one of the other videos I did, I just set it on the ground while I was switching knives to make a point. And in the brief time I had set it on the ground and it had apparently been damp and I didn't realize that and I didn't wipe it down real good after that, it had rust all over the one side. Now, admittedly, that was my bad, but it goes back to my point that I made before of if you're going to bring a knife with you outdoors, camping, where it might be your main knife, it just makes me reluctant that I'm like, if I had made that mistake and it got rust all over this out on a campsite and I didn't have sandpaper or some other way to get the rust off, and then this is going to be my food prep knife, well, I'm not going to prep food with rust all over the blade and shoot, now what am I going to do? And so it really, to me anyway, makes me more reluctant to work with high carbon steel outside, especially because this knife, I think, is as capable as anything that the Bushlore can do, despite being a little bigger and heavier. And the corrosion resistance this has just really is peace of mind. I don't think you're making a sacrifice on a knife like this for, well, the stain resistance makes it not hold an edge as well or makes it something else. I don't think so on this knife. And the fact that you don't really have to worry about it rusting, I just feel like that's a much better outdoors knife, that you don't have to think about that kind of stuff. And so I guess in summary, the takeaway for me that I've now a couple more weeks into using these variety of knives that I've kind of learned about it is just, I don't prefer Scandi grind for all things, despite its prevalence in the bushcraft community online where everyone always talks about it like it's the de facto must-have for outdoors use. And I've been surprised how much a big knife like this is very usable, especially with this choil that if you choke up on it, I mean, finer use stuff that I've done with it makes it feel a lot closer to this in fine cutting tasks that it can actually do. And if you're willing to carry the weight of something that kind of almost feels like a small machete, it's an extremely capable knife, and I think a great value for $69. I would recommend it more than I did even in the last video, and maybe the Flissa knife a little bit less than I did in the last video. Like I said, it still gets honorable mention for the value because it's only $25, and you know, that's great for that price. But if I were in a scenario where you said you could only have one of these knives and you had to bring it with you camping or somewhere and it was going to be your only knife, well, that's a no-brainer for me. I would pick this. And not because of some big macho, I've got to have a huge knife type of thing, just because in practical usage, this, like I said, it just makes more sense. It puts up with abuse a lot better. It's much more rust resistant. And I just feel like it's a nice, comfortable knife to use. And so I did want to update you guys on that, since my thoughts on these knives had changed a little bit, especially since I had complimented this knife on its resistance to chipping, and then it seemed like a week after I did that video, I got nicks all over the blade doing what I felt was a fairly not intense task. I don't consider shaving sticks to be a hard use task, and it was ironic that I had batoned with this and it had held up, but then when I did shaving, it had nicks in the blade, so that just was mildly alarming to me to notice. Maybe that's a function of both the Scandi grind and the D2 steel, I'm not sure. But more to come on these, and if you guys like kind of a follow-up, like continuous impressions as I use different knives, and you think that that's cool, let me know in the comments below, and I'll keep doing that and thinking of ways to meaningfully talk about gear and tools and gadgets that I've talked about before. And also, stay tuned, I have due in today, I don't have it on hand yet, but I have the Joker knife Avispa, and I thought that a really small fixed blade, I think it's got a 3 1/4 inch blade, would be an interesting way to round out this collection, especially with my impressions of the real big knife here. I will be doing a video on that soon as I've had a chance to put it through its paces. So if you're into this kind of content, stay tuned for that. Let me know what your experiences are with different blade steels and edge types, especially for outdoors use. I'm curious what other outdoorsmen and knife guys think of that kind of stuff. I'd love to get your thoughts and learn from you. Hopefully what I've said has been insightful in some way to you as well. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.